Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. For those who are not here this morning, we have now someone who is a specialist also in South Africa. Naomi, she's a PhD student, a master's student. Okay, and she made since her bachelor degree. She has been studying the labor market in South Africa, so she will certainly contribute to our discussions. And thank you, Marcelo Proni. He also works at the Center for Research about Labor Union, CZT, like our colleagues here. So let's start with the presentation about China by Cheng Li. I don't know if I pronounce it correctly, but he's a PhD student here at the Institute of Economics. He's a former GRU student, right?
Yeah.
You made your master.
And continue with the PhD.
That's great. And he wrote the chapter about China for the book we were talking about this morning. So he will make a presentation about the transformation of the Chinese labor market after 2008. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Bruno. Good afternoon. I apologize I cannot join for lunch, but I hope you had a good lunch. So my topic will be about transformation of the Chinese labor market after 2008. And here I pick three very prominent situations. One is employment, wage, demographic changes. So for the employment, there is a general shortage after 2010, especially migrant workers and low-end young workers. But in the meantime, we also have the structural youth unemployment, especially among the young graduates. And we have a very massive migration boom. For example, like every year we have around 200 million of the migrant workers from rural areas working in the cities. But in the meantime, after 2002, we're also facing a very severe situation of the migration shortage, which is very interesting among the academia, even among the socio-political discourse. And this migration shortage was not something like, it's temporary, because when it was started in 2002, everyone think, it's temporary, it's structuralized. But from 2002 to today, it's happening every year, not only in industries, not only with skilled laborers, but also unskilled, even within the region, which are the most of the source of the migrant workers, now also facing the labor shortage. So it's becoming normalized in our labor market. And there's also, in the employment, there's also changes, like service has become the biggest sector absorbing the employment after 2014, which left the agriculture become the smallest share. In a wage, we can say there's overall growth of wage, labor cost as well. But in the meantime, we also see there's decline of the income distribution to labor. And this part has been less talked in the academia, because most of people talking about Chinese labor market is always wage growth, labor cost growth as well. And we also see there's a huge increasing of the inequalities in the income distribution as well. And there's a rapid rise of the minimum wage, but in the meantime as well, the proportion of its minimum wage to the social average wage has been declining to the level of 1990s, or this part has been not talked as well in our societies. Of course, another changes are very strong, and it's very different with other societies, because China in 1980s implemented the fertility policies, which, as you know, one-child policy. Even though today we modified to the two-children policies, but still the impact of the demographic changes are more artificially through the institutions. So the working age population grows until 2014, then sharply decline, and young workers enter to the labor market and start to fall after 2010 as well. And the demographic dividend, which the population dependency rate start to rebound with a sharp decline as well. This is also happening after 2010. And this, of course, there also debate of the skills of the rural surplus labor force, when we're talking about the labor migration shortage as well. So this involving a little bit of the Lewisian discourse of Lewis turning point. So along these changes, we also see a massive industrial unrest. So what I calculated from official data and unofficial records, there are 54 cases per day of the collective labor disputes. Half of them actually went to different scales of labor industrial actions, including webcast strike, demonstrations as well. This could change of your stereotype idea that in China there's no strikes. And I also analyzed that after 2010, it's becoming a very turning point of the worker and labor's movement, because workers' strike demonstrations start to calling political demands, which is different with previously, before 2010. It's more economic demands. And after 2010, many labor movements, union movements are starting to call for example, the independence of trade unions in China, which under the current framework, there's no independent trade unions. It's more under the framework of the umbrella organization of the All China Federation of Trade Unions. And also there's a very highly segmented labor market. So the dichotomous labor market divisions, as in the conventional of the labor market segmentations, does not really explain to Chinese past 30 years experience, because now we have a trichotomous labor market, which means the independent labor market, migrant workers labor market has been emerged, which is also very interesting after 2008, after the financial crisis, with per se of the migrant workers in terms of the generations changes, because new generations join to the migrant workers. We also saw the reverse directions of migrations, which means from urban to rural areas, happening as well. So I would like to say, in the very roughly analyzed, we can say these changes are more structural rather than induced by the crisis, I would like to say. And it's more as a passive response to the economic configurations. As you may know, because before 1980s, China was run a command economy, like planned economy, but after 80s, we started becoming a market-oriented economy. So the labor market transformations is much more response to such changes of the economic configurations and pushed by the proactive labor market policies. As many research saying, after 90s, before 90s, there is none of any labor policies. Labor market policy has been promulgated, but after 90s, in the wake of the neoliberalism, there are more proactive labor policies has been produced. And so in my presentation, I will more discuss three big elements. One is the state. So what's the ideology of the states, and what's their intervention and reforms in construction or transformation of the labor market? In the meantime, I also analyze pretty much of the data in the market performance to look at labor market, how it performs, how the situation works, including wage and structures as well. In the meantime, I was talking about labor. So what's the response of the labor, and what's labor's resistance? In the meantime of the interactions between these three elements. So first, I will talk a little bit more about the market performance. So employment distribution, as we can see, before 1980s, China was run in a very dualistic, like a planned economy between rural and urban. We have rural economy, we also have urban economy. And the changes in this recent decade is like employment population maintains stable. So like 750 million, around 70+% of the population are working age population. And after 2014, more than half of the workers are start to employed in the urban settings. And self-employment grows very fast between both in rural and urban areas. As you can see, in 2007 was almost 5% in rural areas, but after 10 years it's more or less 12%, and in urban areas it's double the same as well. And part-time farming, self-employment becoming more prevalent in rural areas. In the meantime, family divisions of labor start to have an impact on the rural economy as well, because most of the women and elderly live in the rural area, which caused the situation of the phenomenon of Hollowing and aging and feminizing in the rural economy. After this, this is the analysis. And also I will go to the second dimension of the sectoral distributions, the three strata industries. So service surpassed the industry in 2011, becoming the biggest sector absorbed in employment, around 43%. And with the industry lies in the second. And in 2014, industry also surpassed of the agriculture, becoming the second sector, which now agriculture only have a less share. But these things are, before 30 years, agriculture absorbed more than 90% of the employment in China. Within service, there are growing sectors like traffic, transportation, storage, posts have occupied half of the employment, and 28% of the manufacture. This has been maintained actually in this 10 years. And as you can see from the chart here, after 2014, the urban employment surpassed the rural employment. So 2014 would be the turning point as well. And from this part, you can see the blue line is the primary industry, which the agriculture has been also dropping down, contrast to the service. Regional distribution, as in many countries in BRICS, every country have the problems with the disparities among different regions. So in China, normally we divide it by the data collections. We have Eastern, Central, and Western divisions. Disparities of the development level are very huge in terms of the gaps between wage, infrastructure, education, public services as well. But normally when we're talking about the dualistic structure, we're talking about like southeast plus coast versus of the central and west, which southeast coast areas are more developed and with the rest are less developed. And more than 67% of employment in manufacture is located in the eastern region, which this 67% I'm talking about the urban employment, as well as the high-tech industries also centralized in the eastern regions. Central and west as a source of migrant workers, as well as providing the raw materials. As I talked about the migration shortage, now the central and west also facing the labor shortage. And this thing is quite interesting, the distributions by ownerships of the companies. SOE means state-owned companies, COE means collective-owned enterprises, POE is private-owned, and joint venture and foreign invested enterprises. We have more types. This is basically because of before 1980s, it's a pure plan economy, pure command economy. So there was 99% of the employment in the urban areas are state-owned or collective-owned. But with the economic changes, now we also have emergence of the private-owned as well. So as a share of the state-owned enterprises, in 1978 was even 99% in urban areas. Well, in 2008 was dropped to 20%. And in 2016 dropped to 15%. So today the SOE, the state-owned companies, have very little in the employment contributions. And also the private-owned enterprises, self-employed, has been shared to half of the employment in the urban areas. 10 years ago was only 25%. And also there's emergence of the new flexible employment like labor dispatching, outsourced informal works, as growing doubled from 7% to 16%. So the general labor supply and demand, as I said in the first slide, now in China we already in the general situation have a labor shortage in all the areas, not only for the migrant workers. Because apart from 2009 of the financial crisis, every year during the past decade reported a varied degrees of labor shortage. And the overall demand has been exceeded 1. We have the ratio in our labor market indicator, this ratio of job vacancies and job seekers, as this curve demonstrated here. If this ratio over 1, it means we have more demand for labor. When it's below 1, it means like we have surplus labor. And it's very interesting also, today we also found the foreign direct investment have more invest in the service than industry. This is also very, very, very interesting after 2013, which means more demand for labor in the service rather than the conventional, very traditional of the Chinese booming of the industries like manufacturers. But today the FDI is more focused on the service as well. And you can see more demands for the manufacturing sectors in service, especially young workers of high school, vocational school, and technical school. The senior technicians also. For example, the senior technicians ratio was even 1.4 during the past 10 years, which means during the past 10 years there's a huge, severe demand for labor. In the meantime, as explained, there's employment for the young graduates because their ratio has always less than 1, which means they have a surplus supply. And these different colors of the curve also represent different regions as well. For example, the blue one represents in general. East was on the top, and the west on the bottom. But you can see the yellow part on the top was in the West region. So today it means actually the West regions have been more severe with the labor shortage, which has been also surprise to many researchers as well. And so between these segmentations of labor market, so also want to talk a little bit of labor mobility and the last of the migrant workers labor market. So the past decade witnessed more physical space mobility. Rather in 1990s, when we have the state-owned enterprises reforms, it's more occupational because when trying to reduce the proportion of the state-owned companies as well as employment, so it's more occupational mobility of the labor. But in the most of the past 30 years, I think the most prevalent is the more physical space mobility, mainly the rural to urban migrations. And as already talked, the striking headlines of migrant workers, there are more than 280 million of migrants, account for 36% of the whole employment, and has never been diminished since the first beginning. And as the conventional orthodoxy theory is always saying, okay, after that, the diminishing of the dualism, but in China, no, we start to have a triple labor market as well. And concentrated in the manufacture, construction, these rural migrant workers are more concentrated in these areas. And also the very interesting, also mobility are more individual. And with 65% are male, and you can say as only 13% of the labor migration in China was with entire family. This is very different with the Western mobilization theory as well. Once you mobilize the process down, the mobilization process is down. But in China, it's rather different because most of the migration happens in the individual way. And it's also a bi-directional mobility due to the entitlement of land and discriminations at the cities. Mainly, I'm talking about the rural workers. Because in China, this is very different with many countries. In China, all the rural people are entitled to access to land. And every 3 years, there is redistributions among how many people are living in rural areas by your card, and going to redistribute land. So all the rural people have the access to land, which the urban workers does not have access to land. So in this case, that's why the state also trying to differentiate the social welfare policies. But in the meantime, in the urban areas, many industries, many enterprises also have discriminative policies. Even the state also have discriminative policies to the migrant workers because they think you have your livelihood with land, so I give you different welfare policy, welfare package as well. And there's also regional labor mobility from central west to the eastern as well. So the second part, I'm going to talk about the transformation analysis. And I will talk a little bit of the historical transformations because for many people it's new for you. Concept of labor market is very new in China. It came into being after the decision of establish a socialist market economy in 1993. However, the real nascent, for me, I would analyze this is after 2001 when China joined WTO because WTO have agreement with our Ministry of Labor when we're going to establish the modernized, the westernized of the labor market. So for me, I would like to say the labor market concept have been nascent in China after 2001. So previously in the rural areas, the employment run in this way. It's a communal port, which means the rural egalitarian employment. So every rural people in the rural areas with this production in the agriculture activities. In the urban areas, they have the iron rice bowl, which we always refer, which means the urban permanent employment. So all the workers in the urban areas, the state guarantee your employment is permanent. So there's no such a concept of unemployment in the urban areas. And with these two systems from birth to death, welfares to the urban workers, as well as land for the rural residents as well. So the rural people will depend on the land engaging in only agriculture production, whereas urban people are under a centralized labor allocation systems. And there's no mobility for the urban workers as well. Previously, yes, in urban areas, every people in the urban areas are entitled to a job by the states. But it's fixed. It's very hardly, you can see the mobility. For example, many people are husband working in this city and wife working in another city. And the job is being permanent and it's hardly going to mobilize. It's hardly, as long as the state said, okay, you stay there, you can hardly change this job position as well. So with the transformation goals, establish a progressive schedule under a dualistic framework inherited from the past. The state trying to do this modern concept of labor market implemented a dualist framework. So we have the rural labor market, the urban labor market as well, and more focus on the urban labor market, and developed in accordance with the transformations of economic systems from the command economy to the market-oriented economy, and perform more in the westernized modern concept as well. So today in the urban areas, what's the transformation result? It's in urban areas, the states through the marketization process push the workers to the liberal market and bound them to a universal contract-based employment system. So today in China, apart from military service, apart from some public servant jobs, most 90% of the employment are contract-based. Everyone's have a contract. Especially after 2008, we have a new labor code, new labor contract law, which trying to universalize all the employment in urban areas are based on contract. In rural areas, the state trying to use the commercialization process of the labor rural force via the market allocation mechanism. Basically, let the labor market provide jobs for the rural labor force, but also offered very low, less protected salaries, and the state trying to step out of such a role, but only providing a public service, monetary orders, and ensuring social security. I will analyze a little bit. This looks a little like a concept called ordo-liberalist labor market. It's more prevalent in Germany. It's more like a state-guaranteed public service market. It's very competitive and liberal, and that's it. Workers, you just choose freely as well. Demographic analysis, as I mentioned already, because in China it's a segmented labor market. So the urban labor supply are depend on the rural labor force. And all with these three labor markets interacting with each other, it makes more dynamic than other countries when you don't have such segmentations. Or maybe you are only in the conventional segmentation theories as well. But also of the artificial demographic policies, which I mentioned of one-child policy. So you can see the wage structures in the transformation analysis. 15 to 24 used to be 33%, and today it's only reduced to 23%. While for the elderly, from 45 years old to 64 years old, 10 years ago was 25%, and today was 33%. So you can see the working age structure is also becoming aging. And with the different parameters, we can also say it's more prevalent. For example, 15 to 29 years old has been dropped from 29% to 18%. For the elderly, from 45 to 60, this is more or less. And so our working age population, as I talked before, it's 715 million. It's over 70% of the share of the whole work population. But with this graphic, I did a figuration from the UN project with three variations. You can see all are happened after 2015 with estimations of the working age population. So the working age population is going to drop by different variety. Even the low variety is going to drop as well. And it's going to arrive, for example, the working age proportion in 2020 will drop to 7%. Today it's more than 70%. In 2030 will be dropped to 67%, and until 2050 will drop to 58%. It's the same level as in 1990s. Plus, the retirement age in China is quite low, and in general it's not over 64, and the division by gender. Male normally it's 60 to 65. Female is more like 50 to 55. Also depending on job. If you are as manual workers, you are retire earlier. If you are working more like white-collar workers, you are retire more later. So with this situation, the working age population even lower. Also, there is demographic dividend because of our fertility policies. So in 80s, the annual growth rate was 1.2%, and now it's dropped to 0.5%. And there's a research founded every 1% of drop of the dependency rate will offer 0.11% of economic growth. That's what we call the demographic dividend in China. And China, because of artificially through the government trying to reduce of the birth of the rate, then you can also reduce the dependency rate, because then if you have less babies, you don't have to raise the babies. In this case, we call our past economic development was also contributed by this kind of fertility policies. And the gross dependency rate, especially for older, has been long time declining. However, has been rebounded since 2010. So now the elder dependency rate has been growing, and also population aging, as we can see as well. And there's a rural and the rural surplus supply analysis. There's also added research on this. So the higher of the rural income causes the lower of the rural to urban migration. Since farmers are granted with access to land, meanwhile face limited access to urban public services. So all these policies are determining the supply of labor from rural areas to urban areas. So not only demographic going to have impact, but also any institutional interventions also determine such supply of labor. And also in urban areas, because of discriminations, because of slummifications of cities, social conflicts already twisted labor supply from the rural areas becoming more questionable as well. And also, I mentioned, it's not a complete migration process, and it's always emerging of urban to rural migration process, which is going to reduce the labor supply in urban areas. Wage analysis and inequalities. So general rapid growth of wage for urban workers, the improvement of disposable income for rural residents, substantial increase for migrant workers. Minimum wage also got sharply increased. In the past 10 years, always more than 10% of the minimum wage growth. The average wage in urban units tripled from 24,000 RMB to 67,000 in 2016, and these are all the very conventional of the labor market analysis. But I want to emphasize in my chapter talking more about the wage gaps. So wage gaps between urban workers and rural residents still maintain 3.3%, and this during the past 10 years has not been changed. And that's the wage gaps between urban workers to migrant workers maintained 1.7 times as well. I did a research in the real terms, so I calculated the real income that deducted of the inflations. The wage gaps increased from 1.15 from 1990s to 2.48 in 2010s, which means the wage gaps has been increasing. And as for migrant workers, was also increased 3 times. And our Gini coefficient has been prohibited to publicized for 10 years, from 2002 to 2012. However, after 2012, when it has been publicized, our Gini coefficient was 0.48 officially, which is the same level as the United States. But with many researchers found, actually our Gini coefficient is more than 0.5756. Yeah. So many people was questioning how comes a socialist country could have surpassed of the Gini coefficient to the United States. So these are the data of my analysis on the wage gaps, which, for example, the first data I analyzed by different ownerships. Like you can see on the top is the foreign funded units. So today, foreign funded units of the companies offer the higher salaries, which with the lowest as a collective unit, which is very small today as well. On the left, this is the monthly average income in China from 2007 to 2013. However, after 2013, we have methodological changes, so I don't want to using that data. So this you can see on the top is urban workers, in the middle is migrant workers, on the bottom is the rural income as well, and on the right side is the real income, which I analyzed is actually more than 30 years of analysis from 1978 to 2013. You can see the trend of the wage gaps going grow. So the income distribution is more to labor, more than 60% of the income distribution to capital during the past 20 years. And the ratio of the urban workers, this also I start, because we don't have much data available, so I started using urban workers' income as ratio to the GNP, and I found it out it was stagnant for 11% from 2007 to 2010, and it started to grow only a little bit after 2011 to 16%. And the income gap by industries, as also presented before, and there's some data very interesting I found. It's like the executive of the wages of the state-owned companies is 98% of the minimum wage. And the world average is only 5 times. And the industrial wage difference is also in China, it's more than 13 times. However, the world's average was only 0.7. In terms of disposable income gap, urban household maintains almost 3 times than the rural ones during the past 5 years. And the rate of the minimum wage, as always people talking, minimum wage increasing every year with 10%, but you can see its comparison to the average wage has been very low according to the international standards. For example, the ratio to the average wage in the world it's only 50%, and in China was only 21%. And this is a chart I analyze this because in China we don't have the universal minimum wage. Each state have their own regulations. But so I choose the most highest for the monthly minimum wage is Shanghai. Hourly minimum wage is in Beijing. But I also do a comparison. As you can see, the Shanghai province, their average monthly salary compared to the minimum wage. You can see the minimum wage only account to 33%, more like 35% of the average salaries, which is still low. In 1990s, our minimum wage was account for 40%. And after this 20 years development, our minimum wage until to the average of the average monthly wage is only 35%. All these are the monetary forces, but I also want to talk about the non-monetary ones in the wage distribution as well. So the current social insurance, we have 5 different social insurance schemes: have pension, medical, health care, work-related injury, employment, maternity, and housing funding as well. However, each one have a share of the company have to pay for the workers. For example, in terms of pension, so each companies have to pay 20% to the workers' account. So this all sum up all these kind of pensions. There will be 40 to 45% of the more non-monetary benefits to the workers' wage, which for the migrant workers or for rural people it does not have this way. So in this case, you can see this is also my analysis of the migrant workers' participation in the social insurance. First of all, you can see more than 60% of the migrant workers would not have a contract. And plus, if you see there, like pension, it's only 16%. Healthcare is only 17%. So with this, all the things, I would like to say the wage gap is even higher than my previous analysis as well. Industrial actions and union response. So migrant workers shortage get normalized, as I introduced also. Now it's becoming very prominent in our labor market. All this shortage, in the meantime, also parallel with the huge rates of industrial actions, as I mentioned in the first slide. So labor disputes and induced collective conflicts are more visible and intensive as well. And official data, I said, there's 25 strikes per day from 2012 to 2017, with total 8,000 strike records. Officially, I also found the data, and you can see the collective labor disputes also around 10%. And there are, if I combine them together, there are 54 cases per day of the collective labor disputes, and among half of them went to the actions, and centered around the labor remuneration, labor contract, and social insurance. Migrant workers, I want to highlight is also like migrant workers movement like the current labor movement in China, and as a prominent group with the increasing consciousness of class consciousness. And even though today the class topics are very sensitive in China as well. So let's see a little bit look of the response from the states and from the union. So the states trying to like current labor disputes is under the regulation of labor dispute mediation and arbitration law, and there is no mechanism of collective bargaining, no strike, and the state trying to promulgate more laws into, especially after 2008, we have 4 important laws, including this law as well as labor contract law has been implemented in China. So the states very clear wants use law to regulate it. And however, the conventional legislation is facing difficulties to meet workers' demand since most of demand is above lawful content. So today, most of the strikes, which I analyze, is also very interesting, are above the legal contention. The state trying to say, okay, the minimum wage. If the company does not pay a minimum wage, you can go through this way. But today, most of the strikes are demanding higher than minimum wage. So it means the legal legislation is not useful for this current workers' movement. And the response from unions is also more interesting. Unions are less hesitant to represent individual workers than group workers. So unions are prefer individual workers. And emphasize to institutionalize the conflict resolution mechanism and legal construction. It's the same with the state. And mainly focus on the legislative and lawful conditions. And the union act more like agencies for the legal assistance, social work, or workplace welfare distribution. And unions also avoid to present when discontent bursts into the spontaneous collective actions. And union normally adhere to the state and could prevent when workers calling independent unions. And union always absent in the process of workers' collective actions. In the meantime, workers also ignore, bypass, or marginalize union participation as well. And in my previous research, I have also another paper on this. I'm calling this as a double identities of the unions, because from one side, unions think they are state organs. In the meantime, in our constitution, it's just a civil organization. So because of these double identities, they have so much dysfunctions when they are working. And they also have the double marginalization from the states. Because states do not want union to play. Basically, it was the experience in the Poland. So the states trying to use legislation to marginalize the real functions of the unions. In the meantime, workers also trying to marginalize trade unions because they are not really working. So it's really shaking the union's legitimacy. And the union previously have a job as HR in China, but today the HR is everywhere in the company. So as the welfare distributors is already been replaced. States also squeezing, workers also squeezing. So there's no legitimacy for the union to play as well. And there's a divergence between official unions and workplace unions. I can elaborate later. I go to my final remarks. So the transformation of Chinese labor market is more historical and institutional consequences, and carried out through a top-down administrative approach. It's a process of liberalization, decentralization, capitalization, privatization, like grant mobility to labor, autonomy to capital, and with the dilution of the role of the state and the prominent role of the market. It's mainly the result of the proactive labor policies, but with these policies serve the capital accumulation. Not only labor, but also mobility of labor. Not only labor resource, but also the production of the labor resource. There are 4 dimensions of labor have been developed in the Chinese labor market, are considered as the productive factors where the state can play a role. So each dimensions of labor, state trying to play a role. And all factors upon labor, including all what I talked, are set political and economic leverages to the success of development of industrialization in China. So such a beautiful story. However, this beautiful and successful social contract has been collapsed and confronted by the increasing inequalities. I mean, also by region. And many research in the first beginning say, because in China, why East and Coastal region are very developed, because previously our reform saying, okay, let some region get rich, and when this region get rich, this region going to lead the rest going to get rich. But after 20 years, there's no proof of the inward transfer, inward development as well. In the Western region, there's no industrialization as well. It's very less. And especially for workers are facing exclusions, discriminations, especially for workers and farmers, which is a source of the success of our stories. In the context of the ongoing labor shortage, demographic changes, a bottom-up labor movement through an organized even illegal industrial actions response to the current transformations, because in China, strike is not legal. It's more tricky, I can explain later as well. And the whole process is asymmetric transformation, because the state giving more power to the market, give more resource to the market, but not to labor and its organizations. After the 30 years of economic transformations, from the worker side, from the labor side, there's no reforms. Basically, I'm talking about unions as well. And in the absence of unions' essential representations, mechanism of collective bargaining, the current industrial unrest step in and become one of the major wage determinants. And this is my master thesis, actually. And the migrant workers lead and will lead the pioneer role of the current class movement and under the working of the class consciousness. Last, it's very important, in the light of the new social and economic context, like demographic changes, generic changes, as a plan of the state to transfer labor market to an ordo-liberalist labor market, it's highly questioned. Which I explain what is ordo-liberalist market. Yes, thanks very much. That's more.
Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much for this really fascinating presentation. We are all concerned, actually, everybody now in economics or sociology who tries to understand the world has to try to understand China, and it's not easy, as you know. So for us, it's really a privilege to have contact with your researches. Let's go for the questions.
Eventually, I would like for you to actually talk a little bit more about industrial disputes.
Okay.
As you mentioned, there's no right to strike, as you said. Mostly disputes would be they're not collective bargaining, so there's a commission of mediation. There are commissions of mediation to eventually try to solve those disputes.
Yeah.
As far as I understood, actually due to the Blue Conference, we had a professor from Beijing, I think, the University of
Industrial
Relations, where I didn't watch his presentation, but supposedly he would present the Shanghai reform of 2016 of trade union reform, and surely that has implications in terms of solving disputes. So actually I'd like to know a little bit, if you could please talk a little bit more.
Okay.
What is that Shanghai 2016, how it impacts in labor disputes, changes in trade unions, official ones, and you said by workplace unions, I would imagine forms of self-organization that actually are created due to the limitations of the official trade union structure, so people eventually self-organize to deal with their own grievances. So, but my question is, if you could talk a little bit more about it.
Okay. Let's collect more questions.
I have a very specific question.
Yeah.
You talk about the inequality between, I believe it's a mean wage from urban areas and then rural areas.
Average wage.
Average wage.
Yeah, it's not mean.
Mean wage.
It's not mean. It's
not mean.
Average. You mean the mean?
Is it average?
Okay.
It's not median wage.
No.
Maybe a median would be better. And the second thing, you made real wage, so you account for inflation.
Yeah.
But and you show that the two graphs in real terms are more polarized, more polarized in real terms. Yeah. But an explanation for that would be also due to inflation, the difference in inflation in rural areas and also in urban areas. Yeah. So, is there any evidence or any cause to think about difference in inflations in these two sectors? I don't know if you know it.
I would like to ask about maybe do you have information about how change policy of China, official policy of China for foreigners who came to country from abroad because I listen a little, the situation also change. If you have some facts or information about that.
Patricia?
And well, I would like to know if you can explain better this phrase you put, that migrant workers lead and will lead the pioneer role of current class movement. How can? Because as I understood of your exposition, they have the most precarious situation. So, and also I would like to know how many immigrants, Chinese immigrants, also, if it's a factor of that has impact. And that's it.
Sávio?
Just at the final, at first, thank you very much for the presentation. At the final, you talk about ordoliberalism. I think I want to listen further about it.
My question is the same.
Okay, yeah. Any other question?
Just one small question. You said that the service sector, the sector where jobs are growing faster. Specifically, do you know something about the kind of service sector? If it is what subsectors inside the service sector is growing faster.
Okay, so please, Cheng Li. Yeah, a lot of questions.
Yes, thank you very much for all the valuable questions. I will go. I'll try to explain. It's a little bit quite challenging. Thanks for that. For explain a little bit of this industrial unrest or industrial disputes, I would like to say I was in the presentation of his. And be frank, there was not very substantial reforms. It was basically trying to say there's new platform of the unionization. For example, he was explaining there are online platform for young workers who can use application on the cell phones to join the unions as well. And there are some other district branch offices also trying to develop more application to the cell phones, trying to organize workers. So basically there's not really, it's still in a paperwork, and it was only 1 year. There was no substantial data, which he also didn't talk much as well. As I heard, for example, the people asked him how many people was organized through the application. He said it was after 1 year there was 1,000 workers through the application joined the union. Personally, I think these are more paper data, and there's no substantial of the union reforms, as I would question as well. So I think, for the strike, I would like to say is also, I didn't explain because there's no time, I want to explain a little bit as well. In China, the strike is a very tricky term because previously it was in our constitution. However, after the Tiananmen Square incident, it was removed and it was never coming back as well. However, the strikes is not considered as illegal in China because any crime cannot be based on the crime. So I arrest you because you do strike. No, there is no such a crime on this, so it's not illegal as well. But the strike situation is more interesting when you're talking about unions as well, because unions have a double identity. Also from the fact per se, there is union in China. First is umbrella union, only one union in China, or China Federation of Trade Unions. However, with this union, we also have divisions. We have workplace union. We also have official union. Workplace union are basically the workers in the companies receiving the salaries from your work performance. And the official unions are all above the workplace union, which are receiving the money, receiving the salary from the states, or from the union dues as well. So we have these two divergences as well. However, most of the unions in the workplace, they don't really much work as a union. It's more still together with HR and IM, so they're nothing really representative of the workers. So the real strike was actually in China. Recently, I found many was helped by the NGO related to labor. So the workplace union does not really much functioning. So when we talk about unions, so I'm mainly talking about the official unions. What's the official unions as well? So in China, if you want to join the official unions, you have to go to the public servant exams. So which means you are per se was incorporated with the state organs. You are apart from states because your salary going to get from states, your office even located with the civil hall as well. So with this case, of course, you recognize yourself as a state organ. However, there is one thing very tricky in China as well. So in our constitution, for the state organs, if you can only do the things when the law entitles you to do so. So the law does not entitle you to organize strikes. So for them, if you recognize yourself as the state, you cannot do strike because then it's illegal to you. However, in our constitution, the trade union organization is considered as civil organization. So which means you are not states. So in our constitution, if you're not states, you can do everything not if law does not prohibit it. So which means you can organize strike as well. So it's becoming more tricky. However, most of the cases, unions, official unions, they recognize themselves as state organs. That's why in most of the past 10 years of the industrial unrest disputes, there is absence of the trade unions. Rather, there are more labor NGOs are working there. I hope I understand that. And for your question was like, that was the average wage. I think your question would be really valuable for me, which I forgot to actually looking at the mean wage, which would be more interesting as well. The inflations, I do adopting two sets of different baskets. In urban areas, because you're involving with transportation, with housing, with rent, with your consumption are different with the rural areas, because in rural areas everyone's supposed to theoretically have the house, and there's not much really cost in rent. So of course I adopted with a basket of the rural inflation as well, with a little bit modifications because there was not very valid data on that, but I was trying to calculate through my own methodologies. But I do consciously put in two baskets for the inflation calculations. So when deducting that, that's why when you saw it, I think the divergence is even bigger. But even though this one does not including with non-monetary things, non-monetary when I'm talking about this kind of like housing, for example, housing fund. In the urban official jobs, for example, me, I pay 12% of my salary for this housing fund to put in account of the housing program. In the meantime, the companies also put 100%, like 12% as well. Some companies even put 200%. So these are really like 10% of the wage. If you add to this, it's more than 50% of your wage are non-monetary. When you're looking at the migrant workers, when the 60% of them are not have a contract, so they definitely have not. So in this case, this divergence will be bigger. I hope that's the answer. And yes, thank you for your questions. I'm not very expertise on the foreign workers, but I can provide a little bit of information. First, because China does not recognize the double passports as well. And so it's also, in the previous time, we have so many immigrations to Southeast Asia as well as to the United States as well. And so now China is trying to implement it like the Chinese card for these who are the Chinese. And so they could have like a permit to come back to China. Previously, you can only go into China for once a year. The permit only for 1 year, and there are some limitations as well. Now they already extend to 5 years. And basically they want to call in for all the Chinese to coming back as well. So now they are trying to issue another thing, is also very similar to the recognized double passports. But it's just only the plan, and it was not very substantial implementations. And of course, China is also trying to facilitate of the foreign workers in China, especially in the south part of China. And I think in Guangzhou, one of the technology city, also like previous manufacturer cities, they said, I don't have data, but they said it's more like African workers are there, very much prevalent in China as well. So of course, China today are knowing to compete with other countries. So of course, labor resources, human resources are very valuable. So now China, very slowly, I think very recent years, slowly trying to have proactive policies calling for immigrations. I think after 1949 when being republic, I think there was very nice, immigrations going out China, and of course now with all traveling when studies. But I think, calling for foreign workers come to China is still very rare. That's why in our society it's not that much profound looking at the foreign workers. Of course, apart from Beijing, Shanghai, you can see most of that, but still there are very strict and bureaucratic procedures on the work permit. I'm sorry, but I don't have that much information on that. And on your question on the class movement and the immigrations, I think class movement I want to emphasize here is very interesting because the topic of class was very sensitive, especially after the Cultural Revolution, and most of people, especially academic also, they try not talking about the terms. But it's very interesting today, I saw a news, it was also talking that one guy saying like, I'm not middle class, I'm not anxious, but I'm proletariat. Proletariat, I see. So now the terms of publicized of the class is also much prevailing, but I still think they are very interesting analysis to say that in the urban labor market, first of all, most of the strikes are migrant worker strikes. And with the urban conventional or urban formal jobs, we can hardly see their participation of the urban workers are participating in the demonstrations. So I'd like to say most of the demonstration in China today, as you see, strikes are all migrant worker strikes. And there's no such a class, because sometimes people also feeling like the working class or middle class, the middle class, somehow they are benefiting by this movement of migrant workers movement. However, they are not really showing the solidarities to the migrant workers. Of course, there are part of some cases in some country, in some cities, there was a support. And I mean, support is very symbolism. As you know, when the police came, when the residents trying to stand in the road, trying to support in that, but it was really symbolic, it was nothing really substantial. And but also I want to say it's quite interesting also now with the new technologies, with the new generation of the migrant workers in the army of the migrant workers, there are new different ways of the organizing also starting as well. I was doing a research on we call it a leaderless approach strike, which has been developed by the young workers. What they're basically doing, they're using WhatsApp and they organize via WhatsApp, and they can easily to uninstall of the WhatsApp after the strikes as well. And after also when the company intervene or when the state intervene, nobody says who is the leaders as well. Or they are using some kind of symbolism. There's one case study was also very interesting in Guangzhou as well. So all the workers agree through the WhatsApp agreement. So when they go to the dining hall and suddenly everyone starts to knock on the table and the strike started to happen as well. And of course the most prominent strike was Honda strike workers. And because previously all the strikes are economic. We want higher wages, or we want to pay us the insurance as well. We want a work contract. It's all economic, but now we see it's more political as well. More and more workers' movement now we're calling like we are working class, we are workers. We want our own unions. So I think these are the class consciousness really starting. And in the urban formal jobs, I mean especially white collar jobs, many people don't really recognize themselves as workers as well. So, and by this moving of all the whole countries of the strikes, I think this conscious start coming back to the topics. Yes, first I go this and then I go to other liberals. Thank you for the questions. I think the service was, I gave a little bit, like with the service you can see the transportation, storage, post, and these are the most four sectors occupy almost half of the employment in the service part as well. Of course, now with the business, service, productions, transportation, equipment, operations are still growing as well. As China used to be an economy based on exportation, like massive investment, infrastructure investment, as the country, I think our investment rate was more than 60% before, was very outstanding. But now our economic structure is changing as well because of the crisis. So now we don't have that much of exportation. With infrastructures, now you're looking at all the cities, even the second-layer cities, each city have airport, have train, even the high-speed train as well. So the infrastructure has been reaching to the marginal level. So you cannot really have the economy based on the huge investments as well. So now, obviously, the economy started shifting to the consumption. And the consumption, and also that's the ideology, the state really wants to have higher urbanization. Because higher urbanization, you have higher consumptions, which you can stimulate of the domestic consumption. And the Chinese domestic consumption is quite low compared to other countries. I mean, now today, the domestic consumption contribute to the GDP is around 55% or 50% more or less, because it's growing very fast. But compared to many countries, it was 78% or 75%, we are still low. So of course, today, I mean, our economy really have to transfer to the domestic consumption. That's why also the wage increase also in a way like state somehow permanent. Because if you give more wage as a condition way, you have a multiplier of consumptions of the workers, which can transfer our economy from the investment, exportation going to the consumptions. So that's also, I mean, my presentation. I think now the labor market is transferred also according to such a way. So you need more qualified workers in the service. You also want to stimulate the consumptions. You give more salaries as well. And of course, the most thing is in the IT, which previously India was the biggest in the IT sectors, but now China is becoming the very biggest IT exporter of as well. So of course, we're going to involve more workers in the IT service as well, and the artificial intelligence. And I think these are the strategic way. The Chinese 2025 manufacturing report has been provoked many times to USA. Basically, China wants to use artificial intelligence as the fourth industrial revolution, trying to catch up with Germany or with USA. So within the AI industries, China, in the recent government report, has publicized 10 jobs in the AI sectors, basically in the high-tech part. And these are the parts that are going to call for all the qualified workers from abroad, or trying to also stimulate inside China as well. That's the question. And the older liberalism, I think, it's very fascinating. When I was doing many research in Germany as well last year, and older liberalism was nascent in Germany with the Frankenberger school, which is conventional. Historically, it's like a law school. But gradually, some professors, they started developing theories. They think like if we could have a constitution in law, a constitution in economics, like economic constitutions guarantee, regardless of the changeover of the government, our constitution of the economy maintain the same. But also in the meantime, the German labor market German economy is more like liberal. Okay, we want liberal, but we want order. So order liberalism is becoming like order, everything in order, and liberal. So they still recognize it's supposed to be a liberal market, but with the order. So what the order be organized or be offered is the state to provide a role. So it's also a little bit similar to the public welfare states as well. So what's the role of the states can play in this market? So the states are trying to have a market, are very competitive. And so within this market, for example, labor market, everyone based on your qualification, based on your human capitals, or based on whatever, you're competing with each other. So the market is purely competitive, and the state's trying to make sure there's no monopolies in the market, there's no big force. Of course, it's a fail, but that's ideology, right? The state trying to guarantee such an order, and then I think that's the most of the ideology when the Chinese state or the agency is trying to pursue a labor market in China. So basically, pure liberalistic markets and with the states functioning. And of course, states also trying to reduce their role. Today, with the small percentage of the state-owned companies means states that does not want to take responsibilities of the welfare policies to the workers as well. So states trying to step out as well. So states, okay, basically you have contract and then I provide you a basic needs, like 5 insurance, and then that's all what I am supposed to do. And that's where the ideology, what they want to do. But I think it's so much rational which they forgot about labor. I mean, yes, you create a perfect illusion, but labor knows exactly the daily struggles of their lives. So that's why I think this such a beautiful ideology is questionable. It's highly questionable, especially if you're looking at the labor's movement and industrial unrest.
Thank you so much.